Hey everybody, this is Grant Burgess, and this is RB165 Sound Design and Post-Production. I want to just get us started talking about sound design, what it is, what we're going to be doing with it. I want us all to realize that this class is a very different way to learn anything, but definitely a different way to learn sound design and post-production and how to use equipment and work in DAWs, digital audio workstations, things like that. So let's be flexible. This is going to be super fluid. There's going to be changes made along the way. And we're just going to all do our best with what we have available to us at the time. I'm working to see if we can get Pro Tools licenses. I know some of you have Adobe licenses and have different software. I think it's important for us to realize that if you have access to a field recorder, like I'm recording into a Zoom right now, or if you have microphones, or if you don't, if you only have your phone that has a voice memo app, we're going to make that work. That's, we're going to roll with those punches. If you have Pro Tools, or if you have Adobe Audition, or if you have Cubase, or if you can just download Audacity from the internet, whatever you've got, we're going to make that work. Everything we do is going to be on Blackboard or email or Zoom. And I think that's kind of new for a lot of us. I got your responses and I got the sense that, some of you had used Blackboard for, maybe one or two classes, but doing your entire term online is going to be just a new experience for you. So we're going to do our best to make that kind of as full a replacement as possible for being in person. So we're going to be communicating through email as much as possible. We're going to try to set up Zoom meetings so that we can do some video chatting and talk about your pieces or talk about a lesson or just kind of whatever help we need. Any way that we can communicate, I think will be good. I think it's really important when we think about this class to think about the fact that yes, there are best practices. Yes, there are boxes you can check, and of course there's going to be assignments. There's going to be homework, and some of it is going to be super engaging, and some of it may not be. What I ask of everybody is that we take risks in this class. We try to do new things in this class, things that are unique or things that are new to you. I don't want just a class that is you're just kind of checking off the sound design class. I mean, if that's the kind of work that you want to do, so that you can have a very kind of like strong, like broad understanding of sound design, that's fine. But if you want to push it further and you want to try new things, that's very much encouraged. So let's be flexible and communicative and understanding with this class. And I think if we do that, we're going to have a lot of success, and hopefully we're going to have a lot of fun. So my name is Grant Burgess. I am from Gresham. I went to Centennial High School. I went to Mount Hood from, I think, 2008 to 2010. I went to transferred to Reed College, where I got a degree in literature. I went to University of Oregon in Portland and got my master's in multimedia journalism. I have been doing sound design in one way or another since I was about 13 years old. The first thing I ever did was I made a beat, I think on some video editing software. That's what I had access to decades ago now. So, kind of going back to the idea that our equipment is going to be all over the place and our software is all over the place. Whatever you've got, I mean, that's what I used. It's still kind of what I use. I mean, I like, the limitations of having to use different kinds of equipment, whether it's ideal or not. So I currently have a music production studio in school in downtown Gresham called Mid School. So I teach music production, beat making, sound design, podcasting. It's what I do. I think about sound design and audio music production all the time. I mean, I do it every day. So it's very much a part of what I do. So what is sound design? That's one of those terms that kind of gets thrown around, I think, pretty regularly. It's one of those things that, we kind of take for granted. Sound design is something that you find in pretty much any kind of multimedia. You really can't avoid it to some degree, no matter kind of what media you work in, as long as it's kind of time-based media. So radio, video, but you find sound design, in radio, in video. You find it in video games. Actually, one of my favorite topics in sound design, because it's so foreign to me, is sound design in video games. And so, it's something that is really ubiquitous in time-based media. So how could we define it? I think the way that I always think of it is like finding or creating or recording sounds in the world, things you find on the internet, things you find on old tapes, wherever you get your sounds, and then manipulating those sounds, editing, shaping them, giving them effects, layering them, arranging them, and treating them in such a way that it serves the purpose of the media that you're working in. So that is kind of the very basic kind of dictionary definition of sound design. But when I think about sound design, whether it is for film or for theater or for radio or for video games, I think sound design always comes down to decisions. What decisions are you going to make about the sounds that you want to apply to whatever story you're trying to tell or whatever mood you're trying to convey? So as we go forward, I want us to be thinking regularly about decisions. Are we making conscious, intentional decisions with the design that we do? So what are the decisions based on? That's one of the questions that is really kind of difficult to pin down. So they are based on kind of depending on the media or the medium that you're working in. So, if it's video or if it's radio or, whatever it is, the decision is based on the relation to what's going on around it. So if you have got a moment in a piece, regardless of what kind of piece it is, if it's a tense moment, what is the relationship of the sound design, of the atmospheric design or of the kind of the Foley or the diegetic design, versus if it's a very kind of peaceful or relieving scene or moment in your piece. What is the relationship between the sound you're making and the overall story, the larger picture there? Another thing that's really important to remember is the audience's perspective. So what is the audience going to be understanding about the thing that they're listening to or the thing that they're watching, and where are they already going to be when you introduce a new sound? So another thing that you need to base these decisions on is understanding the equipment or the devices that your listeners will be using. So will they be using headphones? Will they be listening through their phone? Will they be watching it on TV with a 6.1 surround sound system? Understanding, the end user experience is really important to sound design. I know that a lot of, thinking about these decisions this early in studying sound design, and knowing that, that a number of you have some experience with sound design. But I think thinking about, these kinds of decisions may seem a bit heady and a bit like, what are we talking about? How do we even get to that place? And we will get there. But I want the idea of decision making and being very thoughtful and intentional about what the listener will be experiencing. I want that to be, what we start off with. So why do we do sound design? What is the point of working to design sounds and to and to make them turn out exactly how we want? I think the biggest thing is to establish the atmosphere of a scene, is to establish what a particular radio piece or what a particular video piece, what is the atmosphere? Like what space do we want to put our listener into? Another reason that we do sound design is we want to reinforce the larger piece. We want to take what the idea, what the feeling of the piece is, what the reality of the piece is, and we want to reinforce that. So what I mean by the reality is, if you are doing a radio piece on traffic, and you want to convey that we're talking about traffic, you may have car noises in the back, and those would be car noises that you went out and recorded yourself, and you put them together, and you want them to sound a certain way. That is reinforcing the topic that we're discussing. Another important thing to remember is that in your pieces, you may be working with diegetic or non-diegetic sounds, and these two terms, diegetic and non-diegetic, are important to realize. Diegetic means a sound that occurs realistically within the piece. So if you are, for instance, making a video and you have someone hanging up a phone, the sound of hanging up a phone, if it's something that you have to sound design, you have to record somewhere else, which is called Foley. You have to record somewhere else and then put it on top of the video. That would be diegetic because it exists in the world that you are trying to portray. If instead it is a tense moment and they're hanging up the phone, and you put, kind of tense music or tense sound over the top of all of that, textures or whatever, that's non-diegetic. It lives outside of the universe of the piece that you're working on. Decisions about which of those to use are very important. Traditionally, diegetic sounds are everywhere. Every time you've ever watched a nature documentary and you see a lion drinking out of a pond, and you can hear the sound of the lion drinking out of a pond, I guarantee you nobody went up there with a microphone and recorded that lion drinking out of the pond. They would be eaten by a lion. So what they did was they went into a studio and they re-recorded what they figured that would sound like. So you see diegetic sounds everywhere, or rather you hear diegetic sounds everywhere. Non-diegetic sounds can often be very heavy-handed. Not always, but they add to the atmosphere, but they also make things much more cinematic. So the decision to use those can be, that's a harder decision to make. And we'll talk more about all these things. I just want to give you a very quick overview. So what I hope to do in this class, I think what would be really ideal to accomplish in this class, is to teach us all to think deeply about sound design, how we do sound design, what decisions to make, what equipment to use, the technical, practical side of it, and kind of the theoretical, artistic side of it. One of the ways that we think deeply about it is we listen deeply. We listen to what we hear every day deeply. So it's going to be important that for the next 10 weeks, you do a lot of listening. Now, I know that we're all kind of stuck in our houses, so it's going to be kind of difficult to listen to too many different sounds. There's only so many dishwashers, or in my experience, crying babies, that there's only so much of those sounds that you can really dig into. But we're going to want to listen really carefully and really deeply to the things that we hear in our everyday lives, and also if we watch movies or we listen to podcasts, or whatever kind of media that we consume that has audio. Let's listen to how they design that sound. And this includes how they treat kind of live recorded sounds. So how are they recording the voices of the people that are acting, or how are they recording the voices of the reporters? How are they recording the sounds in the space? And what decisions are they making about that? So really thinking deeply about what just about sound design in general. We want to, in this class, be able to find, create, record, edit, shape, affect sounds. We want to be able to really manipulate and get our hands on sounds. Obviously, that is going to be central to the class, is the ability to do that. For each of us, there's going to be a specific set of equipment that we have, software that we have, that we want to learn and become really comfortable with. So let's ask the question, what is sound? And it's kind of a basic, rudimentary question to ask, but I think it's an important one to start considering, especially considering that we will be engaging with it in a lot of different ways. So on a very basic level, it's just the compression and rarefaction of air, meaning that it is air being pushed quickly toward the listener's ear and then pulled quickly away. So it's just these kind of pulse waves like that. I want to talk about like the different elements of sound as well. So there are a few One of them is kind of wavelength or frequency. When we talk about the wavelength of a sound, we are talking about how that sound, when you look at a sound wave like this, the how quickly it takes the sound wave to reach its peak and then reach another peak like that, how quickly it repeats itself, that's its wavelength. That's the frequency at which it's playing. And this determines its pitch. So a very quick wavelength like that will create a high-pitched sound. A very slow wavelength will create a lower-pitched sound. Another element of sound is amplitude. And this has to do with the distance between the low and the high spots of a sound wave. And this determines volume. And then there's texture and timbre. And texture and timbre have to do with the sound of a sound, the quality of a sound. So the timbre of an electric guitar is different than a cello, is different than a person's voice or the sound of water. Each of these things will have their own frequencies and their own amplitudes, but the unique shape of those waves is going to determine the texture of that sound. So kind of directionality is another important element of sound. And what that's talking about, I think, is primarily where in physical space is your sound coming from. So is it coming from the right or the left or in both speakers, or is it both speakers but they're slightly shifted in time? So considering where your sound is coming from in a directional standpoint, its directionality, it can be really useful. Again, this is another thing that is pretty heavy-handed to lean on too much. But if you've got a car passing from right to left, which I think that's reversed for you, I don't know. If you've got a car passing from one side to another, you're going to want to have that sound move from one speaker to another. Another element of sound design is rhythm and tempo. So basically, in music, rhythm and tempo is something that is really easy to understand, or somewhat easy to understand. And that is just kind of the speed at which repetitions happen in music. But when it comes to sound design, non-musical sound design, we are talking about kind of the pacing of those repetitions to give us some more kind of cinematic or dramatic effect, or even potentially a more peaceful effect. So these are just some elements to keep in mind, and they'll keep coming back up. So that's like the heady theoretical stuff, which we're going to, talk about throughout the term. But let's kind of break from that. And I want to just kind of ask a couple of questions for you to just think about on your own. So if we were doing sound design for, say, a nature scene, we wanted to, we had some natural scene that's out in the woods or at the beach or wherever, and we wanted to do the sound design for that. What are some of the sounds that we might pull in? What are the things that would really paint that picture, that audio picture for us? What sounds would be easy to record? What sounds would be difficult to record? These are when you know that you are going to design for a certain kind of scene, it's important to be thinking about those kinds of questions as well. We want to talk about ambient sound. So, if there's a specific thing happening in nature, that's not as ambient. It's more of kind of a diegetic Foley sound. But if you've got a scene that is reinforced or that is driven by video, for instance, and you add kind of a background nature sounds, that's called reinforcement. You are reinforcing the scene with sound. And so it's important to think about what are ambient sounds. And this comes back to the idea of listening to the ambient sounds right now. So besides me speaking, what are the sounds around you? So in thinking about a nature scene, it's important to think about what those ambient sounds would be and what some of the more direct sounds would be. So how would the scene change, or what would be the difference between a nature scene that was very peaceful and serene versus a nature scene that would be very maybe high stakes or intense or scary. So what are the differences in the kinds of sounds you would take, what you would do with those sounds? How would you manipulate those sounds to reflect either peaceful or kind of intense, high stakes, scary? These are things to be thinking about, and we're actually going to be writing about them before next class. So I think that's probably enough to talk about today. That's a whole lot to kind of rattle off, but I wanted to get us all on the same page with what sound design is, what some of the elements are, and what we're all in for the term. I want to make sure that it's clear, like what the topic of the class is going to be and what we're going to want to be digging into. So with all these videos, I'm going to be explaining your homework that is assigned for each of the days. All the information will also be on Blackboard, and then to some degree it will also be in your syllabus. So I'm putting out that information. It is very easy to find. So just a couple things that I want to get started today, and they'll be due before next class. The first is I want you to think about the nature scene. I want you to think about what we would do if it were going to be serene or if it were going to be kind of high stakes or intense. And I want you to just write 1 or 2 paragraphs that respond to that. So the specific prompt is on Blackboard, but I want you to be thinking about just what sounds would you collect for that. So, just, a paragraph or 2, and then there's a couple of prompts on Blackboard that you can read, and that'll be due Tuesday night before midnight, 11:59 p.m. Post that to Blackboard, and by the same time, so Tuesday night at 11:59, respond to 2 other posts with your thoughts. So if somebody said something that you hadn't thought of, or if you want to take something that we've talked about today, and we and say, yes, that would work because of this reason, or you could add to it because of this reason. Just respond. I'm going to talk, and it's 3 to 5 sentences per response. You're just responding to 2 of them. So not anything too in-depth, just kind of let other people know that you have seen what they wrote and that you have a thought or 2 about that. Feel free to email me anytime, get a hold of me. We're going to try to get this ball rolling as quickly and as solidly as possible, but it's going to take a little bit of getting used to it. So I will look forward to reading what you write over the next 48 hours, and I will see you all on Wednesday.